Hello and welcome to the EMJ Gold podcast, brought to you by EMJ, your number one open access destination for HCPs and pharma globally. Hi Jade, welcome back to another episode.
Thank you very much. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. I've just celebrated my birthday, so I'm on a high
Yes.
from that and very much looking forward to sharing today's interview. So I recently had the pleasure of chatting to Richard Lowenthal, who is the president and CEO of ARS Pharmaceuticals. Now, this is a company that has very recently received a FDA approval for a nasal spray for severe allergic reactions.
It's definitely a really interesting time for the company, and they're really hoping to challenge auto-injectors as the standard of care. They've had it for quite a while. So yeah, really looking forward to hearing how that journey is going in your discussion today.
Brilliant stuff. Well, yeah, that's definitely something we touch on in our conversation, along with an exploration of Richard's journey. He started out in the FDA, moving into pharma later on, and the current gaps in treatment for allergic conditions. It's an area he's incredibly passionate about and knows a lot about. But before we get into the discussion, can we tell our listeners just a little bit more about Richard and his background?
Yes, I think that's a good idea. So Richard, as you said before, is the president and CEO of ARS Pharma, which he actually co-founded back in 2015. So yeah, really interesting period there. He's got over 25 years of experience in the industry, having started out, as you said, in the regulatory field at the FDA before moving on to various roles across both small and large companies.
That's right. He's also got extensive experience in strategic global development and product registration for new drugs and biologics. That's in the US, Europe, and Japan. But I don't want to spoil the conversation too much by giving him his whole story through us. So shall we get into it?
Yes.
So, Richard, hello. Welcome.
Nice to meet you.
Welcome to
Hey.
the EMJ Gold podcast. How are you doing today?
Very good, thank you.
Well, thank you so much for agreeing to come on. There's lots we're going to get through today, and the topic of choice is the allergy space. I know this is a really evolving area of the pharmaceutical industry. More and more people are having allergies than ever before. 1 in 6 people have had severe allergic reactions that require medical attention. So this is a really interesting space and one where there is a lot of need. So I'm interested to get into it. It's not a topic I've spoken to someone about on the podcast yet. So yeah, really interested to get your thoughts.
All right, very good.
But before we do get into that, we always like to get a bit of a flavour of who our guests are, where they've been, why they decided to join the pharmaceutical industry. And from what I understand, your career actually began at the FDA, which is really interesting. So I wanted to know what kind of sparked your interest in regulatory affairs, and why was this your sort of starting point in the industry?
Yeah, well, in general, I was originally studying at MIT to be a organic chemist and work in the laboratory. After some time, I decided that was not necessarily something I wanted to do as a long-term career. And I was given some advice that I wanted to learn more about the pharmaceutical industry and how the pharmaceutical industry operates. And I was given some advice by some of the professors at MIT, in fact, that maybe I should go work for the Food and Drug Administration to learn about the pharmaceutical development process, the industry, and how the regulatory process works. So I did go and work for the Food and Drug Administration. I started in the Division of Neuropharmacology, which back then was neurology, psychiatry, and pain, analgesics. It broke up into various different divisions after that, and then all came back together now as the Office of I believe it's also neurosciences. And so I worked there for many years, a little over 5 years, close to 6 years. I did change somewhat in the middle of my FDA career to the Division of Oncology. And also at that time, believe it or not, pulmonary and allergy was within oncology, which is very odd, but has now been created as a separate division within FDA. But it may speak to the fact that early on, we're talking now 27 years ago, the FDA actually, there was not many allergy products, and the FDA actually didn't have a home for allergy that made sense. So it was within the oncology group. I mainly focused at the time on oncology, but part of the division obviously was in allergy and pulmonary disease.
Well, yeah, really interesting to hear about your roots, especially that even back at your time in at FDA that you were involved in the allergy space, that this has been something that you've been interested in for a while. I think regulatory is an area that, some CEOs won't have directly worked in before. You've got quite a unique experience coming into this role. Is there anything that you've seen, especially sort of in the wake of this new product coming to market, that are sort of the key regulatory challenges and opportunities for companies at the moment, specifically in this space? And do you think you've got a bit of an advantage given this is your background and leading ARS on this kind of journey?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've worked on a number of products that were 505(b)(2), we call them in the United States, but they're products that the drug is known, and we're trying to use the drug for either a different purpose or improve the delivery of the drug to address problems in the disease. I think when you deal with these older drugs, the regulatory agencies still have standards by today, and they don't want to make exceptions to their current standards. So even though you think that a drug's been around a long time, um, the agencies expect you to develop it to the current standards. So especially with Neffy at ARS, with epinephrine nasal spray or adrenaline nasal spray, depending on where your listeners are, um, it was a real challenge. I think it was probably one of the most significant challenges of my career. And yes, it was very important to understand the regulator, not only the regulatory process, but the actual regulator's mentality, because you have to be able to understand their
Yeah.
perspective on the development of such a product. We were able to, bring this to a point where we were able to get regulatory agreement on how to develop it, because it's a very old drug. You also can't do efficacy studies in this disease. It's never been done. So there's never been a real randomized controlled efficacy study in food allergy or venom allergies. And the reason is that it's considered unethical. If you
Mhm.
induce an allergic reaction, there are times where even epinephrine may not work. So to induce an allergic reaction, take the risk that the person may die, is not considered to be an ethical thing to do, and especially since the drug is already known to work. So there's no positive to giving somebody a placebo or allowing them to progress. There's nothing good that will come out of that. So we had to be very creative in how we developed this. This type of product has a lot of challenges that even for an NCE, it's much more straightforward how to develop it, because you know what non-clinical work to do to get you into the clinic, and you know what clinical work to do to get to your efficacy studies, and you run straightforward efficacy studies and you show it either works or doesn't, and you file that to the agency and say, look, we proved it works, and you get approval, and hopefully it's safe enough to use for that indication, and that's the pathway. So that's relatively simple. Here we can't do efficacy. We've got both safety and efficacy concerns, and all the products on the market, which were all approved without any data. Every injector that's out there was approved without even pharmacokinetics data. So now we understand what they look like, but they're all very different. So every injector gives a different pharmacokinetic profile and even a slightly different pharmacodynamic profile, meaning the way your body reacts to the adrenaline. And that has to do with the rate at which these autoinjectors actually make the adrenaline available to your body. And some of that is due to the depth of the needle, how deep that needle goes, and also the pressure and how much spread there is of the drug when that injector fires and injects the drug into the muscle. Um, so ARS had to actually first really learn about the injectors and both needle and syringe or auto injectors, in order to define the profile of what is out there that is known to be safe and efficacious. And then we had to agree with the regulators on what the profile of Neffy would be, So the regulatory agencies, both Europe and FDA, we were talking to simultaneously, and then added Japan in. So we had all three regulatory agencies' advice at the same time. Um, all the agencies wanted to make sure that nasal epinephrine, adrenaline, at least as good as IM needle and syringe under any circumstance, meaning worst nasal conditions, self-administration, caregiver administration, twice dosing. It was a very unique regulatory process, and I have to tell you that also because of the size of this population, this is a very large population, as you said at the beginning.
Mm.
Um, we estimate, as you said, about 1 in 6 is a correct number. But with people with really severe that probably should have epinephrine, it's probably 6 or 7% of the U.S. population. So the FDA knew, and the same in Europe. FDA knew that this is going to be used widely. They wanted to be ultra cautious and conservative in everything they did with this product to be sure that once it's approved, it's going to work with even under worst case conditions, as I said, and it's going to be safe. And in fact, in the United States, and this is common all over the world, but in the United States, there's about 3,500 cases a year where the person administering the autoinjector, and most of the time a caregiver, accidentally injects themselves in the hand. And that in itself causes a very serious event because the arteries in your hand are very sensitive to adrenaline and contract significantly. And it could cause necrosis. It could cut off the blood flow to your fingers and cause necrosis, nerve damage. So you got to go to the hospital and get treatment. So that's kind of what we consider to be the worst disaster with an autoinjector is caregiver going to administer it to a child, accidentally in a panic grabs the wrong end of the device, it fires into their hand. Then they have to go to the hospital. The child doesn't get the adrenaline to stop the reaction. They got to go to the hospital. And it's a big disaster. So
Mm.
that can't happen with Neffy.
Mm. Wow, it was so interesting to hear about that journey and the various hoops you had to jump through in order to get this over the line, but also the points you raise about the impact on patients, on families, particularly young patients. Are there any other unmet needs in allergy that you would hope to tackle in the future of ARS?
Where ARS evolves as a company, we have really two options. One is to focus on allergies. Um, Alternatives are important in this disease, in food allergy, venom allergy.
Mm.
Alternatives are important. And I think that having other dosage forms possibly could also be beneficial, just to give people a choice. Because obviously, the more choice you have, the more people are willing to accept one of those choices and are willing to carry and use those choices, right? And that includes the autoinjector. So if people want to keep their autoinjector, we're very happy with that. We want to make sure we're addressing the unmet medical need of those people that don't
Mm.
use their autoinjector or those people that don't have anything. And
Yeah,
those
choose
are
what's
maybe
right for
even
you.
those are even maybe the more important people, right? The people that don't have anything
Mm.
they're willing to accept to treat their disease. The next thing we want to focus on at ARS, though, with you still using adrenaline and still using the nasal spray, is an unmet medical need in urticaria. And these are chronic spontaneous urticaria patients that um, have exacerbations or what is commonly called a flare. And this means I, as a patient, may be on antihistamine or maybe antihistamine that work for me, and I'm on Xolair. But even when I'm on a stable regimen and being treated, I still have these exacerbations where I get intense urticaria from time to time. And we do believe that a lower dose of adrenaline, not the dose that we use for food allergy, because we don't need the cardiovascular effects. We're really looking for the effect of adrenaline on stabilizing mast cells and stopping the reaction. And we believe that that's a significant unmet medical need where people with urticaria who are on antihistamine and who have these flares can treat themselves very quickly at home,
Mhm.
relieve the symptoms, reduce the angioedema so they can go to work and aren't embarrassed to go to work. And that's our next focus with ARS is to focus on that urticaria indication,
Mhm.
that unmet medical need. We don't believe there's anything else that's easily going to treat that because adrenaline, epinephrine has this unique beta 2 effect that stabilizes mast cells and basophils, but mast cells especially is causing this urticaria event. So we're going to focus on that. Now, after that, if we acquire or develop other allergy products, we have to decide, are we going to be an allergy focused company where we're going to maximize the value of our commercial efforts and our commercial team to get more allergy products at ARS? Or are we going to use our expertise in nasal spray and be
Mm,
indifferent to indication
mm,
and develop nasal sprays for other purposes, looking at products where there is an unmet medical need, there is a dosage form
mm,
that's not popular, not well used, but obviously the nasal spray is much preferred. Other injection products like naloxone, nalmefene that converted to nasal. Um, and there's a lot of other possibilities out there that we could look at, but they might not be an allergy. So we have to decide as we move forward after we address the urticaria need, which we'll focus on next. Um, we'll also focus on other indications different to the indication.
mm. And find a new disease that requires
Right,
a softer
right,
solution, as you quite
right.
nicely put
Exactly.
it, in relation to
Yeah.
this. It's been really interesting to talk to you, Rich, and hear a little bit
Okay, thank
about
you.
this, specifically kind of the regulatory mission you went through to get it approved, but also, the way it's going to potentially help families and others. What I would like to end on, though, is just a little reflection on you. So you've kind of had various roles within the industry, as you touched on at the start. You're now the CEO of your own organization that, could go in either direction. What's your advice for young people that one day aspire to be a bit more like you, to run their own company that's delivering, new treatments for patients and new options like this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think the most important thing, and I think the reason we've been successful at ARS is that we believe we could do it. Okay, so when you recognize there's an unmet medical need and there's a possible solution, um, you have to believe that you can do it, and you have to, you know, take that risk and you know try to address the issues one at a time. NEFI was very challenging. Some people wonder, how we dealt with all the regulatory agency issues that we had to deal with, and again, you just got to, while we're sometimes unhappy about what the regulatory agency might do, you got to just take it one step at a time and deal with it one step at a time and keep believing that you can get it done.
Mm,
And a lot of people felt that this was a glass bubble. You had to break it. There was no way out because the regulatory agencies were so cautious. Um, and we were able to finally overcome that. And I think for the biggest thing I see with very smart people who have good ideas and why they don't succeed is because they don't believe they can succeed. And while you may fail, and failure is fine, and I was taught that even at Janssen, that doing the right thing, taking the right risks, and doing a good job, even if it fails, is very positive. But obviously, you have to do that to be also successful. So if people have a good idea and they really believe that there's an unmet need, so both because a good product with no need, people won't buy it. So in this case, we're in a genericized market, so we need to have something that's much better than the current use therapy, right? But you need to keep focused on what you need to get done, be very persistent, and believe in what you think you can do, and not um, be afraid to do it, because that's why people don't get things done, is they don't believe they can do it.
Well, Rich, I think that's a lovely note to end on, especially for anyone that's maybe cursing a regulator at the moment. They have to be sure. They have to be sure that is their job. And yeah, follow the unmet need and believe in yourself. So, yeah,
Yes.
great advice. Thank you so
Okay.
much for joining me today, Richard. It's been a pleasure to
All right.
chat with you. And yeah, I hope you've had a nice time.
Yeah, I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I really enjoyed that discussion. Hopefully, as you said there, anyone listening who might be cursing a regulator can be reassured that there's no ill intent on their part. Isabel, do you have any key takeaways from your conversation with Richard that you can share with us?
So many. I really enjoyed chatting to Richard. He's clearly very passionate about improving allergy treatment options for patients. And I think it was really inspiring to hear about how persistent his team was in getting this product to market. I think sometimes you've got to take risks to be where you want to be. They clearly really believed in it, and he led the team with that belief to ultimately succeed. So yeah, that was an interesting story too.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I feel like I learned a lot about allergic reactions from that discussion. It's not really a field I've learned much about before. I thought it was really interesting to learn more about the attitudes to injectors as well, with some parents being reluctant to administer adrenaline in that way. It's not really a problem for everyone, but you can see why alternative methods of administration are a win for the allergy community overall.
Always best to have options. But look, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Big thanks to Richard for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Be sure to tune in next week for another interview with a really inspiring figure from pharma.
Absolutely, but until then, it's goodbye from us.
Bye.